Good day, and today we're going to talk about the first industrial revolution. That's going to be around from 1760 to about 1820 for some other parts of the world, even all the way up to about 1840. This is part one of a part two series in which we're going to be looking at some of the actual businesses and some of the things that have been upgraded. Part two will go into the transportation and other methods of the industrial revolution. So when we look at the population explosion that happens right before the Industrial Revolution, kind of looking into the Renaissance in the Western world, there's a lot of famine, there's a lot of disease that is going on during this time period, and there are lots of wars between smaller kingdoms. And so even though we have a lot of this movement and a lot of generations kind of dying off, you also see in times that there's a population explosion going on because of the stricter quarantine measures and then the elimination of the black rat from Europe. So what is the historical significance of the Industrial Revolution? Well, the Industrial Revolution is going to change human life drastically. After all, more was created in the last 250 plus years than in the previous 2,500 plus years of known human history when it comes to the idea of industry and transportation. So let's define it. What was the Industrial Revolution? Well, the Industrial Revolution refers to the greatly increased output of machine-made goods that began in England in the 1700s. Now, these machines were invented, which is going to replace human labor. Of course, there's still human labor involved in helping to repair the machines, helping to fill the machines, but the machines themselves are going to take the place of several human labor hands. Also, new energy sources were developed to power the new machinery. You're going to see some machines powered by water, by steam, electricity, oil such as gas and kerosene. And there's also an increased use of metals and minerals in order to create these machines. You'll see the creation of aluminum. You'll also be using greater uses with our copper, our coal, our iron, and others. Even though the Industrial Revolution does take place over the course of several generations and worldwide, Great Britain is going to take the lead in the first Industrial Revolution. Their advantages were, first, they had plentiful coal and plentiful iron in their facilities. They had very navigable river systems throughout the UK. Colonies that supplied raw materials and brought finished goods back and forth gave them a steady market and a steady supply of goods. And a government that encouraged improvements in transportation and used its navy to protect British trade is certainly going to help spread the Industrial Revolution to their other colonies. So when we look at the development of the domestic system of production in England, it starts around the late 1600s. It's certainly by the early 1700s is in late bloom. And even into the late 1800s, we would still consider that the time period of the first Industrial Revolution. And the reason why it takes so long is that it has to keep growing. The domestic system could not keep up with the demand for these machine-made goods. So one of the things that's going to help the Industrial Revolution boom and get the goods to where they need to be bought and get the supplies back to England, and especially how the Industrial Revolution is going to move to other countries, is with transportation. Your transportation is going to greatly improve. When we start looking at ships, we went from wooden ships in the 1600s almost immediately into iron ships, and then of course by the 1800s, now you're going to start seeing steel ships. When you start off with your ships having wind-powered sails, by the time you get to the 1800s, we now have steam-powered boilers that are moving the ships much faster. And of course, as we come into the 1800s and then we start even moving into the early 1900s, you're going to see trains and even automobiles that are moving goods. Communication is also going to improve as you get into the late period of the first Industrial Revolution. The telegraph comes along in the 1800s, and of course as we move into the 1900s, the telephone and the radio are also going to move the Industrial Revolution into other parts of the world. So when we look at the Industrial Revolution, that's a pretty big umbrella. Underneath this umbrella, there are different parts to the revolution. First, there's the ideal of a scientific revolution, where with these machine-made goods, there's going to be people who need to engineer and produce these goods. So you're going to see scientists help creating these new inventions. You're also going to see an increased production in medicines and in other things that are going to improve the quality of life. Along with the idea of being able to create new ideas and new machines in the Industrial Revolution, you see an intellectual revolution. This is going to encourage learning and the search for better and newer ways of doing things. Before this time period, you didn't see a public that was broadly educated. By the end of the Industrial Revolution, most of the Western world was highly encouraging everybody in their communities to have some form or level of an education. And of course, with our agricultural revolution as well, you're going to see landowners experimenting in their enclosures with the new machines that are coming along, such as perhaps seeing seed drills or seed drops. You're also going to see crop rotations where they don't plant the same crop year after year in the same field. They're going to rotate one field over to the next. And also we have livestock breeding. With new medicines coming along, with new breeding techniques coming along, you're also going to see a bigger, a faster, a better type of animal that is being bred. And so here is one of the examples of the machines with the seed drill. No longer do you just have to have one man go out into the field and just sow their seeds by hand. Now you can have a horse that he pulls along and the seeds will drop automatically in a very uniform manner. You're also going to see the threshing machine that is going to be widely used, again, being pulled by a horse, and eventually in the early 1900s, you'll see it being moved on its own, in which they can actually take down wheats and other grains much faster than you would have by labor by hand. And of course, with the crop rotation, Charles Turnip Townsend is the one who brought up the idea of turning over your crops. As you can see, for example, in the 4 fields that we have in pictures, you can see barley, turnips, clover, and wheat being turned over from one field to the next as every season or every year turns over. Now, getting back to the Industrial Revolution in the cities and small towns, you are looking at a factory system. This is developed to replace the domestic system of production. Before the time of the Industrial Revolution, most industry was done in the home. You basically would see one family generation after the next doing that craft or that particular machine over and over again in a very small way. Now we're going to see manufacturing take off. It's a faster method of production, and workers are now going to be concentrated in a set location in a much bigger building. Now, production is going to start to anticipate the demand. For example, under the domestic system, a woman might select fabric and have a business person give it to a home-based worker to make it into a dress. But under the factory system, the factory owner bought large lots of popular fabrics and had workers create multiple dresses in common sizes, anticipating that when they sent them to stores, women would buy them. And so here is our 2 different systems that we had. At the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you still had the previous domestic system, and then the factory system, the one that comes in with the Industrial Revolution, is on the right. Whereas we started with hand tools in order to create in the domestic system, you continued on the factory system with machines. The location, you would have been doing this particular business out of your home, whereas the factory system, that's where we get our word factory. The ownership and kinds of tools are small hand tools that are owned by the worker themselves, but in a factory system, a large power-driven machine that is owned by the capitalist or owned by the owner of the factory. Production output in the domestic system was a small level of production. You sold only to your local market. It was manufactured on a per-order basis. Somebody had to come in and order it. In a factory system, your production output was large, it was sold to a worldwide market, and you manufactured on an anticipation of demand. You would make several common sizes, or you'd make the same material over and over again, knowing that eventually it could be sold. The nature of the work done by the worker in the domestic system, basically the manufacturing of the entire item would happen in the home by the single worker. In a factory system, the worker typically made one part of the larger whole, and even up into the early 20th century, you would start seeing an assembly line. For example, Henry Ford's assembly line for his cars would keep workers stationary. The workers would work on only a part or a piece of that machine or product, and then it would move on to the next worker who would work on a different part. In the hours of work in the domestic system, the worker worked as much as he or she would and could, basically was according to demand. In a factory system, the worker would set daily hours. They would go in and out on the same time for the same amount of hours every day. And the worker dependence on the employer, well, in the domestic system, the worker had multiple sources of sustenance. Other employers coming to tell them that they were demanding some of their work. Maybe they had their own garden or farm. If they were wealthy enough or if they had enough demand, maybe they would even get outside farm labor. Whereas in the factory system, the worker relied entirely on the owner or the capitalist of that factory for their income. Urban living made personal farming and gardening very impractical. So when the Industrial Revolution starts in England, we take a look at why. There's a capital for investing the means of production. By the time the Industrial Revolution starts up in the very early 1700s, you have quite a few wealthy owners who want to further produce and make more money. At this point in time, England also has several colonies and markets around the world that they could sell their manufactured goods to, and they also have several places with which to pull the raw materials in for production. Because of their colonization and because they were set up already in a very demanding market business, they had the workers in order to do it. They had the merchant marine in order to protect the goods coming to and from the colonies, and they had the geography. Specifically for England and the UK, the river systems and their materials that they had, the raw materials, were great for that country. So when we look at the one that seems to be the defining factor by why England started the Industrial Revolution first, was the idea of capital. Merchants had the capital to invest in the factory system. They had the money to buy buildings, they had the money to create the machinery, and they had the money to purchase the raw materials. Its colonies gave England access to enormous markets and vast amounts of the raw materials. They possessed, even in their country, the necessary raw materials to create the means of production. You would need coal in order to fire up all of the machines. You would need the iron in order to create the machines. English people could also freely travel from the countryside to the cities. Again, there was a good road system, but with all of the use of all of their river systems in the UK, it was fairly easy to travel to and from town to town. It was fairly easy to get the goods to go from town to town. And of course, at this time, they had the world's largest merchant fleet. Their geography is the political center of Great Britain. Since it is an island, they didn't have to worry for quite some time about being readily attacked or readily stormed by different countries. Great Britain also did not suffer fighting on its land during the wars of the 18th century. A lot of what was happening on the continent just didn't come over to Great Britain. Their island has excellent harbors and ports. Again, with all of the rivers leading out to several different ports, you would have lots of different places with which to put your businesses and an easy method of transportation to get your goods in and out. Their damp climate actually benefited the textile industry. Your threads should stay fairly moist, they should stay fairly taut, and the thread would not dry out because of their damp climate. Their government stayed relatively stable, especially in the 1600s and the 1700s, when we were seeing a lot of other revolutions happening. Shortly after the revolution in the early 1600s, England restores the crown to their king, but they also have their government, their parliament, that is enacting all of the laws. So with a stable government, merchants can thrive. And there was no internal trade barriers. They were able to transfer goods back and forth to Wales, to Scotland, to Ireland, to their colonies without having worried much about taxation or tariffs. Things could just come and go easily. And of course, inventions are going to spur industrializations. Your weavers are going to work faster flying shuttles and spinning jennies. After all, they're no longer working within the home, so we can make bigger weaving areas. And so the machinery, as it grows, is going to become faster and more efficient. The water frame also uses water in order to drive the spinning wheels. You have a power loom that is invented that is spinning mules that are speeding up the production. And eventually, once you move these machineries to factories, you can have multiple people working on the same looms or the same weaving at the same time. And you can have somebody who, if they are done for the day, you can bring in a second shift. As long as it's at the factory where several people know how to work it and know how to repair it, you're going to see a bigger, more efficient, and faster production. So when we can see that necessity is the mother of invention, when we start off with the idea of a spinning machine or a loom that domestic production had within their home, we have more demand now for machine-made goods, so there's a need to speed up weaving. And so because of that, you have people trying to invent a faster, better way of creating something of a spinning machine, and this is where the power loom then gets created. As the power loom is not enough for the demand, there's an increased demand for more raw cotton. We see now a new invention, the invention of the cotton gin that comes along. And of course, as the cotton gin is increasing demand, there is now demands for stronger iron for the machinery, and improvements in iron smelting and the development of steel. The Bessemer process is again going to not only help the textile industry, but it will also move to several different industries. So as you can see, the necessity is the mother of invention. As you see different parts or components of one industry improving, it's going to start moving into other and different industries. And so when this revolution comes along, it starts affecting everything from the scientific to the intellectual, from one type of industry to the next. Necessity certainly is the mother of invention for everything. So when we look at the process of inventing, it never seems to end. One invention is inevitably going to lead to improvements upon it and then to more inventions. Once again, as you're looking at more steam-powered engines being built, factories would then need more coal in order to create this steam. And therefore, because we need to have more coal, mining methods are going to improve to meet this demand for more coal. So then we go into the birth and the growth of the textile industry. So in 1733, we're going to start with one of the first inventions for textiles, and that is the flying shuttle in 1733. This is invented by the Englishman John Kay. It is a hand-operated machine which increased the speed of weaving. Then in 1765, you get the spinning jenny from the Englishman James Hargreaves. That's a home-based machine that spun thread 8 times faster than when spun by hand itself. And then as you continue on in the textile industry, we see in 1769 the water frame being invented by Englishman Richard Arkwright. This is a water-powered spinning machine that was too large for use in a home, and this leads to the creation of textile factories. Now, as we continue on, you'll notice that the time periods get shorter and shorter. And so you see the spinning mule happening in 1799 by Samuel Crompton. And that combines the spinning jenny and the water frame together into a single device, which increases the production of finer thread. And then around the same time, Edward Cartwright, an Englishman, creates the power loom in 1785. And that is a water-powered device that automatically and quickly wove the thread into cloth. Now, of course, there's more demand for cloth and more demand for thread, so there's certainly a growing demand for cotton that's going to create all of these. So American Eli Whitney is going to invent the cotton gin in 1793. This is a device that separates raw cotton from the cotton seeds, increasing the cotton supply while lowering the cost of raw cotton. And in 1846, American Elias Howe is going to invent the sewing machine. After this, the speed of sewing will greatly increase. Now, these machines are so large, they had to be placed in large buildings called factories. And so when the Industrial Revolution that began in Britain was spurred on by a revolution in technology, one of the greatest movers of the Industrial Revolution is going to be the textile industry. So these developments in turn had an impact on the rest of the world. For example, England's cotton came from plantations in the American South, where cotton production skyrocketed from 1790 to 1810 in response to demand from the textile mills of England. Thank you so much for stopping by for part 1 of the Industrial Revolution. If you want to continue on and learn more perhaps about other parts of the Industrial Revolution like transportation and others, check out my part 2 of the series on my Learning Language Arts channel. And as always, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Take care.